The metallic taste of blood pooled in her mouth as Maya dragged herself through the undergrowth, each breath a razor-sharp reminder that death was hunting her tonight. The ancient pines towered above, like silent witnesses to her desperation, their branches clawing at the storm-drunk sky as if they too were trying to escape something terrible. Her left leg screamed in agony where the silver blade had found its mark, a parting gift from the pack that had called her sister for 19 years before deciding she was too dangerous to live. The wound burned with an unnatural fire that told her the blade had been blessed, designed specifically to hunt creatures like her, creatures that shouldn't exist. Keep moving. Don't stop. They're still coming. The rain fell in sheets now, turning the forest floor into a treacherous maze of mud and hidden roots. Each stumble sent lightning through her injured leg, but Maya pushed forward because the alternative was unthinkable. Behind her, she could hear them, the rhythmic pounding of paws against earth, the low growls that spoke of bloodlust barely contained. Her former packmates had shifted, their human restraint abandoned in favor of the hunt. She pressed her back against the rough bark of an enormous oak, gasping as her vision blurred at the edges. The silver was spreading through her system like liquid ice, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts sluggish. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She was supposed to be safe within the pack's protection, not bleeding out in a forest that felt more like a tomb than sanctuary. Why now? Why tonight? The answer whispered through her mind like poison, because 3 days ago, during the new moon ceremony, something had awakened inside her that shouldn't exist, something that made the elders' faces go pale with recognition and fear. When her skin had begun to glow with that strange silver light, when her eyes had shifted from brown to molten gold without her conscious will, they had known exactly what she was, and exactly how dangerous that made her. Maya, the voice echoed through the trees, deceptively warm. Elder Kane, the man who had taught her to hunt, who had braided flowers in her hair during the spring festivals, now spoke her name like a curse. Come back, little wolf. We can make this painless. Painless. As if there was anything painless about being condemned by your own blood. As if there was anything merciful about silver blades and shallow graves. Thunder crashed overhead, and in that moment of nature's fury, something deep within her chest began to burn, not the icy fire of the silver. This was different, warmer, older. It pulsed in rhythm, with her frantic heartbeat growing stronger with each surge of terror and rage that flooded her system. No, not here, not now. She bit down hard on her lower lip, tasting copper as she fought to contain whatever was trying to claw its way to the surface. The pack had cast her out because of this power, because of what it might mean for their carefully ordered world. She couldn't let it loose now, couldn't prove them right about the monster they believed her to be. But as the growls grew closer and her strength continued to ebb, Maya realized she might not have a choice. The first wolf emerged from the shadows like liquid darkness, given form. Marcus, her childhood friend, her first kiss, now advancing with silver fangs, bared in golden eyes, empty of recognition. The sight of him broke something inside her chest, some last fragile hope that this was all a nightmare she might wake from. Please, she whispered, knowing it was useless. The hunt had begun, and nothing would stop it now, except death. Hers, most likely. 2 more shapes materialized from the gloom, flanking Marcus in a perfect hunting formation. Sarah and David, packmates she had trained with, laughed with, shared countless meals beside warm fires. Now they stalked her like the monster they believed her to be. Maya's back hit another tree, and she realized with dawning horror that she had been herded. The oak behind her was massive, too wide to circle quickly with her injured leg, too tall to climb before they reached her. They had driven her exactly where they wanted her, trapped, bleeding, alone. The silver fire in her chest pulsed again, stronger this time, and she felt something shift behind her ribs, power, ancient, terrible, beautiful power that sang of silver flames and moonless nights. It whispered promises of survival, of revenge, of showing them all exactly what they had tried to destroy. Let me out, it seemed to say. Let me show them what you really are. Found you. Elder Cain stepped into the small clearing, still in human form but radiating the kind of controlled menace that made her wolf whimper in submission. In his hand, the blessed silver blade caught what little moonlight filtered through the storm clouds, gleaming with promise of pain. Did you really think you could run from us, little abomination? Did you think we wouldn't track our own blood to the ends of the earth, if necessary? His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. Your mother begged us to give you a quick death. I think after this little chase, we'll have to disappoint her. Something inside Maya snapped at the mention of her mother who had stood silent while the elders pronounced their sentence, who had watched with tears in her eyes as her only daughter was driven into the night like a rabid animal. The power surged upward, no longer asking permission but demanding release. Her skin began to glow with that same silver radiance that had condemned her, starting as a faint shimmer and building towards something that would light up the entire forest. She could feel her bones beginning to shift, not into her wolf form, but into something else entirely, something that had never walked this earth before. There it is, Elder Cain breathed, and for the first time she heard something other than cold determination in his voice. Fear. The curse reveals itself. Do you see now why you cannot be allowed to live? Maya opened her mouth to speak, to plead, to explain that she had never asked for this power, had never wanted to be different, but what came out instead was something else entirely, a sound that was part scream, part howl, part something far older and more primal than either. It echoed through the forest, like a call to arms, like a prayer, like the dying song of something beautiful and terrible. It spoke of loneliness and betrayal, of power constrained and love perverted into fear. It was the sound of a heart breaking, amplified by magic into something that could shatter stone. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the circle of her hunters, something heard that cry and answered. If this story has already awakened something wild within you, something that recognizes the call of the untamed heart, then you need to subscribe to our channel right now. Hit that notification bell because here at we don't just tell stories, we unleash them. And Maya's story? This is just the beginning of a journey that will test everything you think you know about love, power, and the price of being different in a world that fears what it cannot control. The glow around Maya pulsed brighter, and in the distance, heavy footsteps began moving through the undergrowth with purposeful intent. Something was coming, something drawn by her desperate call. Something that would change everything. Chapter 2. The footsteps stopped just beyond the tree line, and Maya felt the shift in the air like a physical blow. Whatever had answered her call carried power, not the desperate, chaotic energy that writhed beneath her own skin, but something controlled, ancient, terrifyingly sure of itself. Elder Cain's head snapped toward the sound, his weathered features twisting with confusion that quickly morphed into alarm. The three wolves flanking Maya whined low in their throats, their hackles rising as some primal instinct warned them that they were no longer the apex predators in this forest. Show yourself, Cain commanded, raising the silver blade higher, but Maya caught the tremor in his voice, the way his free hand had begun to shake. Whatever was out there, it wasn't part of his carefully laid plan. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the steady drum of rain against leaves and Maya's ragged breathing. Then, like shadow given form, he stepped into the clearing. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The man who emerged from the darkness moved with liquid grace, each step deliberate and predatory. He was tall, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen in human form, with broad shoulders that spoke of barely contained strength. His hair was black as midnight, slicked back by the rain to reveal a face that belonged in ancient legends. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes. God, his eyes! They were the color of winter storms, pale gray shot through with silver, and they held depths that made her think of things far older than her 19 years could comprehend. When those eyes found hers across the clearing, Maya felt something deep in her chest respond, not the chaotic power that had been clawing for release, but something quieter, something that recognized him on a level that bypassed conscious thought entirely. Maya Silverpaw, his voice rolled through the night like distant thunder, rich and dark and impossibly familiar. I've been looking for you. The words hit her like a physical blow. He knew her name, not just her first name, but her family name, the one that marked her as descendant of the old bloodlines, the ones the pack histories whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. Impossible, Elder Kane snarled, but even as he spoke, Maya could see him taking an involuntary step backward. The other wolves pressed closer together, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. She's pack-bound. No outsider should even be able to scent her this far from our territory. The stranger, though something about him whispered that he was far from being a mere stranger, tilted his head slightly, studying Kane with the kind of detached interest a scientist might show a particularly interesting insect. Pack-bound, he repeated, and there was something almost amused in his tone. Is that what you told yourselves? That your little rituals and blood oaths could contain what runs in her veins? He took another step forward, and Maya watched in fascination as the very air around him seemed to shimmer with barely restrained power. This wasn't just another wolf. This was something else entirely. Stay back. Kane raised the silver blade, pointing it toward the newcomer. This is pack business. The abomination belongs to us. The temperature in the clearing dropped 10 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. The stranger's eyes went from storm gray to pure silver, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Call her that again, he said softly, and I will show you exactly what an abomination looks like. Maya felt tears she didn't realize she'd been holding back spill down her cheeks. When was the last time someone had defended her? When had anyone stood between her and the world's cruelty? But why? The rational part of her mind whispered its warnings even as her heart lifted with desperate hope. Why would a stranger risk himself for someone like you? As if he could hear her thoughts, those impossible silver eyes found hers again, and this time she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Recognition. Not the kind that came from seeing a face in a crowd, but the deeper kind, the kind that spoke of souls finding their missing pieces. You called, he said simply, and somehow his voice reached her clearly despite the storm and distance. I answered, as I always will.
Always? What did that mean?
How could he speak of always when they had never met? But even as the questions tumbled through her mind, Maya felt something inside her respond to his presence. The chaotic silver power that had been burning through her veins began to settle, not disappearing, but finding some kind of equilibrium it had never possessed before, like a key finding its lock, like coming home to a place she'd never known she'd been searching for. Elder Kane must have sensed the shift because his face contorted with rage. You have no right. I have every right. The stranger's words cut through Kane's protests like a blade through silk. She is mine to protect.
Mine. The words should have offended her, should have made her bristle with independence. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest, chasing away some of the bone-deep cold that had settled there the moment her pack had turned against her. Protect?
Kane laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. From what? From justice. She's a danger to every living thing in this forest. The silver fire burns in her blood. She'll consume everything she touches if she's allowed to live. Then it's fortunate, the stranger said, his gaze never leaving Maya's face, that I happen to be immune to fire. He stepped closer, moving past the three wolves as if they were nothing more than overgrown puppies. Marcus snapped at him reflexively, fangs aimed for his leg, but the man moved like liquid mercury, avoiding the attack without seeming to even notice it. You're making a mistake, Kane warned, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Walking away with her will bring nothing but destruction. The Council of Alphas, the stranger interrupted, can go to hell. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as he drew closer. With each step, she could feel the power radiating from him more clearly, not wild and desperate like hers, but controlled, refined, ancient beyond measure. He moved like someone who had never doubted his right to exist, never questioned his place in the world. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped and held out his hand. Come with me, Maya Silverpaw, he said, and in his voice she heard promise and safety and something that might have been love, if she dared to hope for such impossible things. Let me show you what you really are. She stared at his outstretched hand, strong, scarred, steady as stone, despite the chaos surrounding them. Behind her, she could feel Elder Kane's rage, building like a coming storm. Around her, the three wolves were tensing for an attack that would end in blood and death. But in front of her stood a man who had appeared from nothing, drawn by her desperate cry, speaking her true name like a prayer. A man whose mere presence made the frightening power in her chest settle into something that felt almost right. Trust him. Something deep inside her whispered, trust him or die here in the mud like the monster they believe you to be. Maya reached out with a trembling hand and placed it in his. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into silver fire. Chapter 3. The fire didn't burn, it sang. Maya gasped as power rushed between them, her silver light meeting his and creating something entirely new, something that pulsed with the rhythm of ancient heartbeats. For one impossible moment, she wasn't dying in a forest clearing. She wasn't the broken, cast-out girl bleeding in the rain. She was something magnificent, something that belonged to legends whispered around dying fires. Then reality crashed back as Elder Kane's roar of fury shattered the moment, killed them both. The three wolves lunged as one, but the stranger, her stranger, some possessive part of her mind whispered, moved with inhuman speed. His free hand swept out in a gesture that seemed almost casual, and all three attackers hit an invisible wall mid-leap, crashing to the ground with pained yelps. We're leaving now, his fingers tightened around hers, and Maya felt that incredible strength pulling her forward away from the only life she'd ever known. But as they ran through the forest, his arm supporting her wounded leg, her mind began to spiral backward. The silver fire connection had opened something between them, not just power, but memory. His memories mixing with hers in a way that should have been impossible, showing her flashes of truth she wasn't ready to face. She was 3 years old, silver light dancing around her tiny fingers as she played in her mother's garden. Her mother's face, not filled with love, but with growing horror. Elena, her father's voice, tight with fear. She's too young. The power shouldn't manifest until what? Her mother's whisper. Until never, Marcus. It should never manifest, not in our bloodline. Stop, Maya gasped, stumbling. The memories were coming too fast. 20 years of carefully buried truth forcing its way to the surface. Please, I can't. He stopped immediately, catching her as her legs gave out. They were deeper in the forest now, surrounded by trees so ancient their trunks could hide a dozen people. The storm had lessened to a gentle rain, but Maya barely noticed. Her whole world had narrowed to the chaos in her head and the steady warmth of his arms around her. Breathe, he said softly, his voice like velvet in the darkness. Let the memories come. You're safe now. Safe? When was the last time she'd felt safe? She was 7, playing with the other pack children during the harvest festival. Little Tommy Clearwater had fallen into the river, his head disappearing beneath the dark water. Without thinking, Maya had reached out with something deeper than her hands, and the water itself had responded, lifting Tommy to safety on a pillar of liquid silver. The other children had screamed. Their parents had pulled them away. And Maya had learned her first lesson about being different. Different meant alone. The Silver Paw bloodline, she whispered, the words feeling strange in her mouth. She'd heard the name whispered in pack meetings, seen the way the elders' faces darkened when they spoke of the old families. You know what that means, don't you? His hand stroked through her wet hair with infinite gentleness. I know exactly what it means, little flame. The question is, do you? She was 12, her first shift approaching. The other children talked excitedly about their wolves, about feeling their other half stirring beneath their skin. Maya felt nothing, just the silver fire that grew stronger every day, the power that made plants grow too quickly and made sick animals heal with her touch. There's something wrong with me, she'd confessed to her mother. Elena Silverpaw had gone white as winter snow. There's nothing wrong with you, she'd lied. You're just special.
Special. The word tasted bitter on her tongue now. That's what she called it. My mother, as if giving it a pretty name would change what I really am.
And what do you think you really are? His voice held no judgment, only infinite patience. Maya laughed, the sound harsh and broken, a monster, an abomination, something that should never have existed. The words her pack had thrown at her like stones. The silver paw line was supposed to have died out generations ago. Everyone knows the stories: wolves who turned to flame instead of fur, who could call down lightning and make the earth itself obey their will, too dangerous to live among normal wolves. She was 16, working in the pack's healing lodge. Old Martha Riverstone had been dying of the wasting sickness. Her family gathered around her bed to say goodbye. Maya had been washing dishes in the corner when the grief became too much to bear. She'd reached out without thinking, letting just a thread of her power touch the dying woman, and Martha had sat up, color flooding back to her cheeks, completely healed. But instead of gratitude, Maya had seen terror in every face in that room, terror and recognition. They knew, she whispered, remembering. Even then, they knew what I was, but they needed me. As long as I kept my power small, controlled, useful, they could pretend I was just a gifted healer. They could use me without having to face the truth. His arms tightened around her, and she could feel anger radiating from him like heat from a forge. Not anger at her, anger for her. When was the last time someone had been angry on her behalf? She was 18, standing before the Council of Elders as they pronounced their judgment on a pack member who had broken the old laws. Death, Elder Kane had said, his voice cold as winter stone. The old blood cannot be allowed to spread. It carries too much risk, too much power. Better to cut out the infection before it spreads. Maya had watched them execute a distant cousin she'd barely known, a man whose only crime was carrying traces of the ancient bloodlines. She'd stood there silent, knowing she carried far more of that forbidden heritage than he ever had. I should have left then, Maya said, her voice barely audible above the rain. I should have known they'd come for me eventually, but I kept hoping, if I was useful enough, quiet enough, small enough, they would let you live a half-life, he finished, and there was steel in his voice now, hidden, ashamed, pretending to be less than you are to make others comfortable. She was 19, 3 days ago, standing in the sacred circle during the new moon ceremony. The ritual should have been simple: young wolves pledging their loyalty to the pack, accepting their place in the hierarchy. But when Maya had spoken the ancient words, something had responded. The silver fire had blazed up from her skin like a beacon, and in that light everyone had seen the truth she'd spent her life hiding. Silver Paw, Elder Kane had breathed, recognition and terror warring in his eyes. The cursed bloodline lives. They were going to kill me the moment they saw my true nature, Maya realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. All those years of pretending to accept me, of letting me heal their sick and tend their wounded, it was all conditional. The second I became more than they could control, they revealed themselves for what they truly are. His voice was quiet, but she could hear the rage beneath it. Cowards, threatened by power they could never hope to understand. Maya pulled back enough to look at his face, seeing her own pain reflected in those storm-gray eyes. How do you know all this? How do you know about the bloodlines, about what I am? Who are you? For a moment, something that might have been vulnerability flickered across his features. Then he cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. I am someone who has spent 5 years searching for the last daughter of the Silverpaw line, he said simply. Someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be cast out for the crime of being born with power others fear. 5 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. You've been looking for me for 5 years. But why? How did you even know I existed? His smile was soft and sad and full of secrets she wasn't ready to hear. Because, little flame, your cry for help wasn't the first time your voice has called to me across impossible distances. I've been hearing you in my dreams since the day you turned 14 and your power truly awakened. I've been following that silver thread of connection across half the continent, following rumors and whispers and the fading scent of flame on the wind. Maya's heart stopped. That's impossible. Is it? He leaned closer, and she could see flecks of gold in his silver eyes now. Tell me, Maya Silverpaw, have you never dreamed of winter storms and dark forests? Have you never woken with the taste of snow on your lips and the sound of a voice you couldn't quite remember calling your name? She had, God help her, she had dreams that felt more real than waking life, dreams of running through moonlit forests beside someone whose face she could never quite see, dreams of being understood, accepted, loved for exactly what she was instead of in spite of it. Who are you? She whispered again. He stood, lifting her with him, as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as the rain began to fall harder again. My name is Kieran Stormright, he said, and even in the storm his voice carried clearly, last alpha of the northern reaches, guardian of the old ways, and if you'll let me, your mate. The world tilted sideways. Not just someone who had found her, not just someone who had saved her, someone who claimed to be bound to her by forces older than pack law, deeper than blood, stronger than the fear that had shaped her entire life. Maya stared up at him, this impossible man who spoke of dreams and destiny as if they were simple facts, and felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking, blooming, like a flower that had spent its entire life in shadow, finally turning toward the sun. I don't understand any of this, she admitted. Kieran's smile could have lit up the entire forest. You don't have to understand it yet, little flame. You just have to trust it. Trust me. As he carried her deeper into the woods, away from everything she'd ever known, Maya closed her eyes and let herself lean into his strength. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from what she was. She was running toward it. Chapter 4. The ancient stones rose from the forest floor like sleeping giants, their surfaces covered in moss so old it seemed to pulse with its own life. Maya's breath caught as Kieran carried her into the clearing, her silver fire responding to something in the air itself, magic so thick she could taste it on her tongue, metallic and wild and older than memory. What is this place? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the standing stones. The Moonfire Circle, Kieran said, his own voice hushed with reverence, one of the last sacred sites that still remembers the old ways, built by the first of your kind, before the Great Purge, before the Council of Alphas decided that power like yours was too dangerous to exist. He set her down gently beside the center stone, a massive pillar of black granite that seemed to drink in the moonlight filtering through the clouds. The moment her feet touched the ground, Maya gasped. Energy rushed up through the earth itself, silver threads of power that recognized something in her blood and sang in welcome. The symbols carved into the stone began to glow. Kieran! She breathed, taking a stumbling step backward, but there was nowhere to go. Every stone in the circle was awakening, now, ancient runes flickering to life with the same silver fire that burned in her veins. What's happening? The circle knows you, he said simply, watching her face with an intensity that made her shiver. Just as I knew you, just as every sacred site from here to the northern reaches will know you, once your power is fully awakened. The glow intensified, and suddenly Maya could read the symbols as clearly as if they were written in her native language. Words in the old tongue, the language of the first wolves, the language of prophecy and power and things that were never meant to be forgotten. When silver flame burns brightest in the darkest hour, when the daughter of two worlds walks the boundary between, when the pack bound are broken and the wild calls home, she who carries the fire of the first moon shall rise. No. The word escaped her lips like a prayer, like a curse. No, this can't be about me. I'm nobody. I'm just what? Kieran moved closer, his eyes reflecting the silver light dancing around them. Just a girl who can heal the dying with a touch. Just a woman who can call water from the earth and make silver fire dance at her command. Just the last living heir to the bloodline that once ruled all the packlands under the moon. Ruled? The word hit her like a physical blow. That's impossible. The Silverpaws were never rulers. We were outcasts, exiles, abominations. His voice was bitter now, edged with old anger. That's what they want you to believe, isn't it? That your bloodline was always cursed, always wrong, always something to be ashamed of. The symbols pulsed brighter, and suddenly Maya was seeing things that couldn't be real, visions flickering across the stone surfaces like memories trapped in crystal, a woman who looked like her own reflection, standing before thousands of kneeling wolves, silver fire dancing around her like living jewelry, cities built into the sides of mountains, powered by moonlight and magic. Forests that grew in perfect harmony with their guardians, where no wolf ever went hungry and no sick child ever died for lack of healing. The Silver Empire, she whispered, the name rising from some deep well of ancestral memory. But that was just a myth, just stories the elders told to frighten children. Stories, Kieran said softly, are how truth survives when those in power would rather see it buried. Another pulse of light, and Maya saw the ending of that golden age, armies of ordinary wolves, led by the first council of alphas, burning the silver cities and hunting down every man, woman, and child who carried the ancient bloodline. She saw her ancestors fleeing into the wilderness, saw them hiding their power, saw them slowly forgetting who they had once been until only whispers remained. They destroyed us, she realized, her voice hollow with the weight of generational trauma, not because we were evil, but because we were powerful, because we reminded them that there was another way to live, another way to be. And now, Kieran said, his hand finding hers as the visions continued to swirl around them, the bloodline has been reduced to one, the last daughter of the Silver Empire, raised by the very wolves who would have slaughtered her ancestors without a second thought. The central stone erupted with light so brilliant that Maya had to close her eyes. When she opened them again, new words were appearing, burning themselves into the granite with silver fire. The last daughter shall reclaim what was lost. She shall walk between flame and fur, between wild and tame. In her hands, the power to heal what has been broken. In her heart, the choice that will shape the new age. But beware, for every prophecy holds within it the seeds of its own destruction. The fire that creates can also consume, and the choice, once made, cannot be undone. Maya's legs gave out, the weight of destiny crushing down on her like a physical force. Kieran caught her, pulling her against his chest as she struggled to breathe around the panic clawing at her throat. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't be what you want me to be, what this place thinks I am. I don't know how to save anyone. I can barely save myself." "You don't have to save anyone," he said fiercely, his hands framing her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "That's not what the prophecy asks of you. It asks you to choose, to reclaim your power, yes, to remember who you really are. But the shape that takes, the path you walk, that's yours to decide." Around them, the stones began to dim, but Maya could still feel their power thrumming beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. She looked up at this man who claimed to be her mate, this guardian of the old ways who had appeared from nowhere to show her truths she'd never imagined. "What if I choose wrong?" she whispered. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if the fire consumes me?" Kieran's smile was soft and sad and full of infinite faith. "Then I'll be there to catch you when you fall, to help you build something new from the ashes, to remind you that power without love is just destruction, but power guided by love, that's what changes the world." Love. The word settled into her chest like a warm ember, chasing away some of the cold fear that had been her constant companion for so long. Could she dare to believe it, that this beautiful, impossible man could love her not despite what she was, but because of it? "The prophecy mentions a choice," she said, looking back at the now quiet stones. "What kind of choice?" Kieran followed her gaze, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. "I don't know," he admitted. "The old texts speak of it, but they're vague. Something about healing versus vengeance, creation versus destruction. The power of the silver bloodline can go either way. It can restore the old balance, or it can burn the current world to ash and start over from nothing." A chill ran down Maya's spine that had nothing to do with the night air. She thought of the rage she'd felt when Elder Cain had condemned her, the moment when she'd wanted nothing more than to let her power loose and show them all exactly what they should fear. how easy it would have been to let the fire consume everything, to make them pay for every moment of hiding, every year of shame, every life that had been lost to their fear and ignorance. "You're afraid," she realized, studying his face. "You're afraid I'll choose destruction." "I'm afraid," he said quietly, "that after everything they've done to you, everything they've taken from you, the temptation for revenge will be too strong to resist. And I'm afraid that if you choose that path, I won't be strong enough to stop you. Because Maya," his voice broke slightly, "I love you too much to stand against you, even if you're wrong." The honesty in his words stole her breath. Here was a man of incredible power, an alpha in his own right, admitting that his love for her might make him complicit in the destruction of everything he'd sworn to protect. "What if," she said slowly, "what if there's a third choice, something the prophecy doesn't see because it's looking at the past instead of the future?" Before Kieran could answer, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of smoke and the distant sound of howls. Maya's blood turned to ice as she recognized the hunting calls of her former pack. "They found us," Kieran said grimly, rising to his feet and pulling her with him, faster than I expected. Maya looked at the sacred stones, still humming with residual power, then back at the man who had shown her who she really was. The choice was coming sooner than either of them had anticipated. "If they want a monster," she said softly, silver fire beginning to dance around her fingertips, "maybe it's time I stopped disappointing them." Kieran's eyes widened with something that might have been fear, might have been pride, might have been love so fierce it could reshape the world. "Maya." The howls grew closer, and in the distance the first flicker of torchlight appeared between the trees. The last daughter of the Silver Empire stood in the circle of her ancestors and felt destiny closing around her like a trap, or like coming home. Chapter 5. They came like a living tide of fury, emerging from the forest with the coordinated precision of wolves who had hunted together for decades. But these weren't just the three who had cornered Maya in the clearing. Elder Cain had called in the entire pack council, 20 of the strongest wolves in their territory, all united in their determination to end the Silverpaw bloodline once and for all. Maya felt their approach like pressure against her skull, the weight of their collective hatred and fear pressing down on the sacred circle. The ancient stones responded to the threat, their silver glow intensifying until the entire clearing blazed with light that made the wolves halt at the tree line, whimpering and shielding their eyes. "Surround them." Cain's voice cracked like a whip through the night. "Don't let either of them escape." But even as the wolves spread out in a hunting formation, Maya could see the reluctance in their movements. The sacred site was anathema to them, a place their ancestors had spent generations teaching them to fear. They would attack, because Cain commanded it and because their terror of what she represented outweighed their reverence for the old places, but they would not enjoy it. 20 against 2. Kieran murmured, his body shifting into a combat stance that spoke of battles fought and won across countless years. "Not the worst odds I've faced." 20 against 1, Maya corrected, silver fire beginning to spiral up her arms like living jewelry. "You're not going to fight my battles for me." His head snapped toward her, storm gray eyes wide with something between pride and terror. "Maya, you're not ready for this kind of confrontation. Your power is still raw, uncontrolled." "Then maybe it's time I learned some control?" She stepped forward, placing herself between Kieran and the advancing wolves, and for the first time in her life, she didn't try to hide what she was. Silver fire danced around her like a second skin, and her eyes blazed with light that made several of the wolves stumble backward. "Look at her!" Cain's voice rang out across the clearing, pitched to carry to every member of his pack. "Look at the abomination she's become. This is why the Silverpaw bloodline must die. They corrupt everything they touch, turn sacred places into fonts of dark power." Dark power. Maya almost laughed at the irony. The fire burning through her veins felt like the opposite of darkness, like sunlight given form, like the first dawn breaking over an endless night. But she supposed that to wolves who had lived their entire lives in shadow, any light would seem blinding. "She's just a child," one of the younger wolves called out, his voice wavering with uncertainty. "Maybe if we explain the danger to her, help her understand, why the power must be contained. Contained? The word erupted from Maya's lips with more force than she'd intended, and several wolves actually fell to their knees as the silver fire flared brighter, like my mother contained it. Like I contained it for 19 years, hiding and diminishing and pretending to be less than I was just to make all of you comfortable.
Maya,
Kieran's voice was a warning, low and urgent. She could feel his presence behind her like an anchor, steady and strong, but he wasn't trying to stop her, wasn't trying to hold her back. For the first time in her life, someone was letting her be exactly as powerful as she was meant to be. No, she said, her gaze sweeping across the circle of wolves who had once called her pack sister. I'm tired of containing it. I'm tired of being small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance you threw my way. You want to see what the Silver Paw bloodline is truly capable of? Then look. She raised her hands, and the earth itself responded. Silver fire erupted from the ground in a perfect circle around the sacred stones, creating a barrier of light that rose 20 feet into the air. The wolves yelped and scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The fire surrounded the entire clearing, beautiful and terrible and absolutely impassable. Impossible. Cain breathed, his weathered face pale with shock. The old text said the power was spent, that the bloodline was too diluted. Your text lied, Maya said simply, and with another gesture, pillars of silver flame rose from the earth like living towers. Or maybe your ancestors just didn't want you to know what you'd really destroyed when you burned the silver cities. She could feel it now, the true scope of her inheritance, not just healing, not just the ability to make plants grow or call water from deep wells. She was connected to the very essence of life itself, to the silver fire that burned at the heart of all living things. She could feel every wolf in the clearing, could sense their fear and confusion, and the deep, bone-deep terror that came from facing something they'd been taught was impossible. Please, one of the older females called out, her voice breaking. We're not your enemies, Maya. We raised you, loved you. You loved a lie, Maya interrupted, and for the first time, real anger crept into her voice. You loved the small, manageable version of me, the healer who would fix your problems and never ask for anything in return. The moment I became something you couldn't control, you decided I was better off dead. Because you are. Cain stepped forward, his authority finally overriding his fear. Don't you see what you're becoming? Look around you, this display of power, this need to dominate and intimidate. This is exactly why the Silverpaw bloodline was cursed. You can't help but corrupt everything you touch. The accusation hit like a physical blow, and for a moment Maya wavered. Was he right? Was this magnificent, intoxicating power just another form of the monster they'd always said she was? But then Kieran's hand touched her shoulder, steady and warm, and his voice reached her clearly despite the roar of silver fire surrounding them. The power isn't the corruption, little flame, the fear of it. Maya looked around the circle of faces, wolves she'd grown up with, trained beside, shared meals and laughter, and the small intimacies of pack life. And in every face she saw the same thing, terror, not of what she'd done, but of what she represented. The possibility that their comfortable world order, their careful hierarchy, their certainty that they were the natural rulers of the wild places, all of it built on a lie. You're not afraid of me, she realized, her voice soft with wonder and growing fury. You're afraid of what my existence means, that maybe the Council of Alphas isn't the highest authority, that maybe there are older powers, older ways, older claims to leadership that you've spent generations trying to erase. Enough. Cain's patience finally shattered, and he shifted into his wolf form with a sound like tearing silk. His massive gray form was scarred from a lifetime of battles, his yellow eyes burning with fanatical certainty. If you won't come quietly, then we'll drag your corpse back to the council. They need to see that the threat has been ended. The other wolves began to shift as well, the clearing filling with the sounds of bones reshaping and muscles expanding. 20 wolves against one young woman who had never been in a real fight in her life. But as they prepared to charge, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. Not the wild, chaotic power that had been clawing at her restraints, something deeper, something that remembered ruling an empire, commanding the loyalty of thousands, standing as protector and guardian of all the wild places under the moon. "If you want to see a monster," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying clearly over the snarls and growls of the transformed wolves, "then let me show you what your fear has created." The silver fire around her began to change, darkening to the color of molten metal, growing hotter and more intense. The very air shimmered with heat, and Maya felt the first true taste of what her power could become if she let it loose completely. Behind her, Kieran sucked in a sharp breath. "Maya, don't. This isn't the way."
Isn't it?
She turned to look at him, and he took an involuntary step backward at what he saw in her eyes. "They've made their choice, Kieran. They chose fear over acceptance, violence over understanding. They chose to see me as a threat to be eliminated rather than a person to be saved. And what does that make you if you choose the same thing?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade, sharp and cutting and impossible to ignore. Maya felt the dark fire waver, felt the choice balanced on a knife's edge. She could burn them all. Every wolf in this clearing, every member of the pack that had betrayed her, every council elder who had pronounced judgment on her bloodline. She had that power now, could feel it singing in her veins like poison honey. All she had to do was let go. Around the circle, 20 wolves tensed for an attack that would end in blood and death, while the man who claimed to love her waited to see what she would choose. And in the center of it all, surrounded by silver fire and ancient stones and the weight of prophecy, Maya Silverpaw stood at the crossroads between salvation and damnation. The choice was hers, and everyone, friend and enemy alike, would have to live with the consequences. Chapter 6. The silver fire dimmed, not extinguished. Maya could never put that particular flame out completely now that she'd acknowledged its existence, but controlled, banked, pulled back from the brink of something that would have changed her forever, and not necessarily for the better. The wolves around the clearing relaxed slightly, sensing the immediate threat had passed, but they remained in formation, waiting, watching, ready to attack the moment her control slipped again. "Stand down," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the sacred space. "All of you, leave this place and don't follow us again." Elder Kane's massive wolf form snarled, yellow eyes blazing with frustrated rage, but even he could see the futility of attacking someone who could create barriers of living fire with a thought. After a long moment, he shifted back to human form, his weathered face twisted with defeat and bitter acceptance. "This isn't over," he said, pulling on the clothes he'd discarded before shifting. "The council will hear of this. They'll send hunters, real ones, wolves who specialize in dealing with aberrations like you."
Let them come. Maya's voice was steady, but Kieran could hear the exhaustion beneath it. Using that much power, holding back that much destruction, had cost her. "I'm done running." "And I'm done hiding her," Kieran added, his own voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha. "Tell your council that Maya Silverpaw is under my protection. If they want her, they'll have to go through me first." Kane laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You think your reputation still matters, Stormright? You're a rogue alpha without a pack, an exile who lost his territory to his own arrogance. The council fears you about as much as they fear yesterday's storm." For just a moment, Maya saw something flicker across Kieran's features, pain, quickly masked but unmistakable. There was a story there, some wound that Kane's words had reopened, but before she could ask, Kieran stepped forward, and the temperature in the clearing dropped 10 degrees. "Perhaps," he said softly, "it's time they remembered exactly why they should." Whatever Kane saw in Kieran's eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. Without another word, he gestured to his wolves, and they began to retreat into the forest, but his parting words echoed through the sacred space like a curse. "Choose your side carefully, girl, because once this war begins, there won't be any safe places left to hide." Then they were gone, leaving Maya and Kieran alone among the ancient stones. The silver fire barriers flickered and died, but the residual power still hummed in the air around them, making Maya's skin tingle with awareness. "War," she repeated softly.
Is that really what this is? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. It's what it's always been, he said finally. The difference is that now you know you're fighting. Maya sank down beside the central stone, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the bone-deep wariness of someone who had spent their entire life pretending to be someone else. I almost killed them, she whispered, wrapping her arms around her knees. For a moment, I wanted to burn them all to ash and scatter them on the wind. Kieran sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. But you didn't. Because you stopped me. No. His voice was gentle, but firm. I asked you a question. You stopped yourself. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. And when she didn't, he brushed a strand of silver-white hair from her face. That's the difference between power and wisdom. Little flame. Anyone can destroy. It takes real strength to choose not to. Maya leaned into his touch without thinking, starved for gentleness after a lifetime of walking on eggshells. Tell me about the northern reaches, she said quietly. Tell me about the pack you lost. She felt him go still beside her, his hand pausing in her hair. Why? Because Kane's words hurt you, and I want to understand why, because you know everything about me now, but you're still a mystery. She turned to face him fully, seeing her own silver fire reflected in his storm-gray eyes, because she stumbled over the word, still unable to quite believe it. If we're really mates, then I want to know who you are. Not just the guardian, not just the alpha, you. For a moment, she thought he would deflect, change the subject, retreat behind that mask of controlled authority he wore so easily. But then his shoulders sagged slightly, and she saw the man beneath the legend. I was 25 when I inherited the northern reaches, he said, his voice soft and distant with memory. Youngest alpha in the territory's history, and absolutely convinced I could change everything overnight. My father had been old-fashioned, traditional, content to follow the council's rules and keep his pack safe within carefully defined boundaries. I wanted more. Maya settled more comfortably against the stone, sensing this was a story that had been carried in silence for too long. More how? More freedom, more power, more connection to the old ways. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. I started researching the ancient bloodlines, the ones the council had declared extinct, started questioning why certain territories were forbidden, why certain rituals had been banned. I thought I was being progressive, enlightened. I thought I was building a better future for my pack. What happened? Kieran's hands clenched into fists, and Maya could see the old pain written across his features like scars. I found them. 3 families carrying traces of the old blood, living as rogues in the deep wilderness because they had nowhere else to go. They were weak, scattered, terrified, nothing like the monsters the council claimed they were. So I brought them home, gave them sanctuary, integrated them into my pack. Maya's heart sank, guessing the end of this story. The council found out. The council found out, he confirmed, his voice hollow with old grief. They gave me a choice: exile the old blood families and submit to a formal censure, or face the consequences of harboring enemies of all pack kind. And you chose to protect them. I chose to protect them. He looked at her then, and she saw the weight of that decision in his eyes. The council declared my territory forfeit, sent 5 other packs to claim it. My people were given the choice to surrender and be absorbed into other territories, or fight a war they couldn't win. Maya reached out without thinking, covering his clenched fists with her hands. His skin was warm, solid, real. They chose to fight. For 2 years, we held them off. But we were outnumbered, outgunned, cut off from supplies and allies. The old blood families I'd tried to protect were the first to die. The other alphas made sure of that. And my people died for a principle they barely understood, because their alpha was too proud to admit when he'd made a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Maya said fiercely. Protecting people who needed protection isn't a mistake. Kieran's smile was sad and grateful and full of pain that might never fully heal. Tell that to the 43 pack members who died in that war. Tell that to the children who grew up orphaned because their alpha thought he could change the world. Maya was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of his loss, understanding now why he'd seemed so driven to find her, to protect her. Is that why you've been searching for me? Some kind of redemption? Maybe. He turned his hands palm up beneath hers, intertwining their fingers. Or maybe I've been searching for you because the dreams told me you were the one person in this world who might actually be strong enough to change it. Dreams? Maya's heart skipped. You said before that you've been hearing me in your dreams. What did you mean? Kieran was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he began to speak. The first time was 5 years ago. I was camped in the ruins of my territory trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life when I heard someone crying, not with their voice, with their soul. This desperate, lonely sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He squeezed her fingers gently. I followed that sound for 3 days before I realized it was inside my head, a call for help from someone I'd never met, someone I couldn't even be sure existed. Maya's breath caught. 5 years ago was when I turned 14, when my power really started manifesting. The night before your 14th birthday, Kieran confirmed, I know because I've been tracking the dates ever since. Every time you were in real danger, every time you felt truly alone, every time the weight of hiding what you were became almost too much to bear, I felt it, heard it, your pain became mine, across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Tears spilled down Maya's cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. I used to dream about you too, about running through forests that weren't quite real, beside someone whose face I could never see clearly, but I always felt safe in those dreams, protected, like whatever was hunting me in the waking world couldn't reach me there. Because it couldn't. Kieran lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I was guarding your dreams, little flame. It was the only way I could protect you when I didn't know where you were. The intimacy of it stole her breath. For 5 years, while she'd felt utterly alone in the world, he'd been there, standing guard over her sleeping mind, sharing her pain, searching the continent for traces of her existence. That's impossible, she whispered, even as her heart told her it was absolutely true. So is calling water from stone. So is healing mortal wounds with a touch. So is creating barriers of living fire. He cupped her face with his free hand, thumb brushing away tears. She didn't realize we're still falling. The old blood carries more than just power. Maya, it carries connections that run deeper than the physical world. Bonds that transcend distance and time, and the small, frightened understanding of ordinary wolves. Maya leaned into his touch, feeling something in her chest expand and settle, and finally find its home. Is that what this is? A bond? The bond, Kieran corrected softly. The one the first wolves sang about in the ancient stories. Two souls that are two parts of the same whole, finding each other across whatever obstacles the world tries to place between them. She should have been terrified. Should have run from the intensity of it, the sheer impossibility of a love that defied every natural law she'd been taught to believe in. Instead, she felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete, perfect peace. I love you, she said, the words falling from her lips like silver fire, like prayer, like the most natural thing in the world. Kieran's eyes blazed, and for a moment the air around them shimmered with shared power. And I love you, Maya Silverpaw. I have loved you since the first time I heard you cry out in the darkness. I will love you until the last star burns out and the world forgets what moonlight looks like. When he kissed her, it was like coming home to a place she'd never known she'd been searching for. Gentle at first, almost reverent, then deeper as she melted against him with a soft sound of surrender. Power danced between them where their skin touched, silver fire meeting winter storm and creating something entirely new. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maya rested her forehead against his and smiled. So what happens now? She whispered. Kieran's answering smile was fierce and full of promise. Now we show them what the old blood is really capable of when it's no longer afraid to burn bright. But even as he spoke the words, Maya caught the scent of smoke on the wind and her blood turned to ice. Something was burning. Something close. Something that smelled like home. You just felt that connection between Maya and Kieran, didn't you? That beautiful ache in your chest? Yet most of you will walk away without even hitting the like button. If this story matters enough to make you feel something, it matters enough for one click. Don't be the person who takes everything and gives nothing back. Like and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds. Chapter 7. The settlement burned like a funeral pyre against the night sky, orange flames reaching toward the stars as if trying to claw their way to heaven. Maya stood at the edge of the ridge, watching everything she'd ever known turn to ash and ember, and felt something inside her chest crack open like an egg. No, she breathed, taking a stumbling step forward. No, they wouldn't. But even as denial poured from her lips, she could see the truth written in fire and smoke. The pack's main village, where she'd spent 19 years learning to be small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of belonging they threw her way, was being systematically destroyed, not by accident, not by wildfire or lightning strike, by wolves. They're covering their tracks, Kieran said quietly, his voice heavy with grim understanding, making sure there's no evidence of what happened here tonight, no witnesses to tell the council that they failed to contain the threat. Maya's enhanced senses picked out individual scents through the smoke, wolves she'd known since childhood, moving through the burning buildings like ghosts, setting new fires, destroying anything that might tell the story of this night, and underneath the smoke and flame, another scent that made her stomach lurch with horror. Blood. The children, she whispered, her voice breaking, the elders who couldn't fight, the mothers who stayed behind. Maya. Kieran's hand closed around her arm. Gentle but firm. There's nothing we can do for them now. Nothing we can do? She spun to face him, silver fire blazing in her eyes, with fury that had nowhere safe to go. They're murdering innocent people to cover up their failure, and you want me to stand here and watch? I want you to think, he said urgently. This is a trap, little flame. They know you'll come. They know you can't watch your people die without trying to save them. They're counting on your compassion to deliver you right into their hands. Maya knew he was right. Every logical part of her mind screamed that this was exactly what Elder Cain would do. Use her love for the innocent against her, turn her greatest strength into her greatest weakness. But logic meant nothing when she could hear the screaming carried on the night wind. I don't care if it's a trap, she snarled, silver fire beginning to spiral around her like a living thing. I won't let them die for my sins. She started down the ridge at a dead run, ignoring Kieran's shouts behind her. Power flooded through her system, the silver fire responding to her desperate need to save, to heal, to protect the innocent from the consequences of her existence. But she was too late. The first body she found was little Sarah Moonwhisper, barely 6 years old, who used to bring Maya wildflowers during the spring festivals. The child lay crumpled in the doorway of what had once been the schoolhouse, her small body twisted at angles that spoke of violence beyond necessity. Maya fell to her knees beside the girl, hands glowing with healing light as she reached out desperately. But there was nothing to heal. Sarah's bright spirit had already fled, leaving behind only empty shell and the terrible silence of the dead. I tried to stop them. The voice came from the shadows between 2 burning buildings, weak and ragged with pain. Maya's head snapped up, and she saw a figure limping toward her, Marcus, her childhood friend, the first boy she'd ever kissed, now barely recognizable beneath the blood and soot covering his face. Marcus! She started toward him, but stopped when she saw the silver blade in his hand, the same blessed silver that had been used to hunt her, now dripping with fresh blood. What have you done? What I had to do, he said, and there were tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. What we all had to do, the council's orders were very clear. No witnesses, no one who might speak against the official story. Maya's world tilted sideways. The official story that the last Silver Paw descendant went mad with power and destroyed her own pack before fleeing into the wilderness. Marcus's laugh was broken, hollow, that we tried to stop her, tried to contain the damage, but she was too far gone, too consumed by the darkness in her blood. You're lying. But even as she said it, Maya could see the terrible logic of it. Who would believe her word? against the testimony of an entire pack. Who would question the council's version of events when the evidence was literally burning around them? I wish I were, Marcus whispered. God, Maya, I wish this was all some nightmare I could wake up from. But the council made it clear, either we eliminate all evidence of what really happened here, or they eliminate us, all of us. Every man, woman, and child in the pack. So you chose to become murderers instead. We chose to survive. The words exploded from him with desperate fury. What were we supposed to do? Stand against the entire council system for one girl? Watch our families be slaughtered for harboring an abomination? Abomination. There was that word again, cutting through her like silver blade through flesh. No matter how far she ran, no matter what power she claimed, she would always be the monster in their story. Where are the others? She asked quietly, silver fire beginning to build around her hands. The ones who didn't fight. The ones who were just guilty of living in the same place I did. Marcus's face crumpled, gone. All of them. Elder Kane said, he said it had to be thorough, complete, no loose ends that might unravel the story later. Maya stared at him. This boy she'd grown up with, played with, trusted, and felt the last fragile piece of her faith in redemption crack apart. They hadn't just betrayed her. They'd committed genocide to cover up that betrayal, murdering their own people to maintain the comfortable lie that the old blood was always inevitably destructive. You killed children, she said, and her voice was soft as silk and deadly as winter storm. You killed innocent children to save your own skins. Maya, please. Marcus took a step toward her, hands raised in supplication. I know how this looks, but we didn't have a choice. The council would have what? The temperature in the burning village dropped 20 degrees as silver fire blazed up around Maya like wings of living light. Killed you. The way you killed them. It's not the same thing, isn't it? The words erupted from her with the force of a lightning strike, and every burning building in the settlement flared brighter for a moment before the flames turned silver. Marcus stumbled backward, the blessed blade falling from nerveless fingers as he stared at what she was becoming. Maya, you're scaring me. Good, she said simply, because I'm starting to think that fear is the only language any of you understand. She raised her hands, and the silver fire responded eagerly. Here was justification at last. Here was proof that every cruel thing they'd ever said about her bloodline was true, not because the power itself was evil, but because the world had given her nothing but evil to respond to.
They wanted a monster?
She'd give them a monster. Maya, stop. Kieran's voice cut through the haze of rage like a sword through silk. She turned to find him standing at the edge of the firelight, his face stricken with something between horror and heartbreak. Look what they've done, she said, gesturing to the burning village, to Sarah's small body, to the evidence of systematic slaughter disguised as righteous justice. Look what they're willing to do to maintain their comfortable lies. Tell me this doesn't deserve punishment. It does, Kieran said quietly, stepping carefully into the circle of silver flame that surrounded her. It deserves justice, but what you're about to do, that's not justice, little flame. That's just more death. Then, what would you have me do? Maya's voice broke on the words. Let them get away with it? Let them tell their story and be believed? Let the council pin this massacre on me while they go home to their families and sleep peacefully in their beds? I would have you be better than they are, he said simply. I would have you choose the harder path, the one that leads to real change instead of just more blood on the ground. Maya stared at him through the silver fire, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. The prophecy's words echoed in her mind. The choice once made cannot be undone. In one direction lay vengeance, righteous and satisfying, and ultimately empty. She could burn Marcus where he stood, could hunt down every wolf who had participated in this slaughter, could make them pay in pain and terror for what they'd done to innocents who had never threatened anyone. In the other direction lay something harder and more uncertain, the long, difficult work of building something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Marcus cowered in the dirt at her feet, waiting for judgment, while Kieran stood just beyond the flames with love and faith and desperate hope written across his features. The choice was hers. The fire around Maya pulsed once, twice, then began to dim. Run, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the burning night. Run, Marcus, and tell your elder Cain that Maya Silverpaw is done playing by his rules. Tell him that if he wants a war between the old blood and the new, he can have one. But it will be fought on my terms now, in my time, in the manner of my choosing. Marcus scrambled to his feet, stumbling backward toward the tree line. Maya, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, she said simply, but perhaps it can keep you from joining them. Go, and pray you never see me again. He fled into the darkness, leaving Maya alone with her mate and the burning remains of everything she'd ever called home. The silver fire around her guttered and died, leaving only the ordinary flames consuming the buildings where she'd learned to walk, to speak, to dream of a belonging that had always been a lie. You chose mercy, Kieran said softly, wonder in his voice. I chose not to become what they said I was, Maya corrected, turning away from the burning village with tears cutting silver tracks down her soot-stained cheeks. But mercy? No. Marcus lives because I need him to carry a message. The council wants to play games with innocent lives? Fine. Let's see how they like playing with someone who's finally stopped caring about their rules. As they walked away from the ruins of her old life, Maya felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not the wild, chaotic power that had nearly consumed her in the sacred circle, something colder, more controlled, more dangerous. They had created exactly what they'd always feared she would become, and now they would have to live with the consequences. Chapter 8. 3 days later, Maya stood at the edge of Whispering Falls and watched the Council of Alphas gather their forces like storm clouds preparing for war. They thought they were hunting a broken girl, driven mad by grief and rage. They had no idea they were walking into the territory of something far older and infinitely more dangerous than their small, frightened minds could comprehend. 47 wolves, Kieran reported quietly, lowering the field glasses he'd been using to scout the approaching army, including 5 alphas and their personal guards. They're not taking any chances this time. Maya didn't look away from the waterfall, where silver mist caught the morning sunlight and threw rainbows across the ancient stone. This place had been calling to her for 3 days, pulling at something deep in her blood with an insistence that grew stronger with each passing hour. Now she understood why. This is where it began, she said softly, her bare feet finding purchase on rocks worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. The first Silver Empire. The original seat of power. She could feel it now, layers upon layers of old magic soaked into the very stone, waiting for the right bloodline to awaken it again. They think they're coming to end a threat. Instead, they're about to witness a resurrection. Behind them, hidden in the caves that honeycombed the cliff face, were the survivors. Not many, a few dozen wolves from various packs, who had grown tired of living in fear, tired of pretending the council's version of order was worth the price it demanded. They had come when word spread that the last Silverpaw lived, drawn by hope they hadn't dared feel in generations. Among them were 3 elderly wolves who claimed to carry traces of the old bloodlines, their power so diluted they'd managed to hide it for decades, a handful of young adults whose gifts had started manifesting in ways that would have meant death sentences if discovered, children who glowed faintly in their sleep, or who could speak to animals, or who saw visions of possible futures dancing behind their closed eyelids. The remnants of a magical legacy that the council had spent generations trying to exterminate. They're looking to you to save them, Kieran said, studying her face with concern. Maya, the responsibility is exactly what I was born to carry. She turned to face him, and he took an involuntary step backward at what he saw in her eyes. The silver fire was still there, but banked now, controlled, refined into something that could cut through steel or heal a mortal wound with equal precision. The prophecy was never about choosing between healing and destruction, was it? It was about learning to wield both with equal skill. And if you're wrong, if the power consumes you anyway, Maya's smile was soft and sad and absolutely certain, then you'll do what you have to do. You'll stop me, whatever it takes. because that's what love really means, protecting someone from the monster they might become, even if it breaks your heart to do it. The sound of approaching wolves drifted up from the valley below, paws on stone, the rustle of undergrowth, the low murmur of voices discussing strategy and positioning. 47 wolves come to kill one girl and call it justice. Maya stepped to the edge of the cliff, her white dress catching the wind like wings. She'd found the gown in the ruins of an ancient shrine 3 days ago, along with a silver circlet that fit her head as if it had been made for her. The dress of a silver paw empress, preserved by magic against the ravages of time. "I am Maya Silverpaw," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the valley despite the distance. "Last daughter of the Silver Empire, heir to the throne of bones and ashes you built with your fear. You want me? Come and take me." The forest below went silent. Then slowly shapes began emerging from the trees, wolves in human form, heavily armed, spreading out in the classic hunting formation that had served the council for centuries. At their head walked Elder Cain, flanked by the 5 alphas who ruled the neighboring territories. Behind him came the elite hunters, the council's personal enforcers, wolves who specialized in tracking down and eliminating threats to the established order. "Surrender now," Cain's voice echoed off the cliff faces, "and we'll make your death quick. Continue this charade, and we'll ensure you suffer for every life you've destroyed." Maya laughed, the sound bright and wild and utterly without fear. "Every life I've destroyed, Elder, I haven't even started destroying lives yet, but since you've come all this way." She spread her arms wide and silver fire erupted from her skin like wings of pure light. But this wasn't the chaotic, desperate power she'd wielded before. This was controlled, refined, ancient beyond measure, and absolutely terrifyingly beautiful. The waterfall responded first, its silver mist beginning to glow with the same ethereal fire that surrounded Maya. Then the stone itself began to wake, ancient runes carved deep into the cliff face, blazing to life as if they'd only been sleeping instead of dormant for centuries. "Impossible," one of the alphas breathed, his face pale with recognition and dawning terror. The Whispering Falls were cleansed, purified. The old magic was burned out generations ago. "You burned nothing," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly despite the growing roar of power that filled the air around her. "You just taught it to hide, to wait, to remember every slight, every murder, every child killed for the crime of carrying gifts you were too small to understand." The ground beneath her feet began to crack, silver light bleeding up through the stone like luminous veins. Behind her, the waterfall was changing, not just glowing now, but singing. Ancient voices joined together in harmony, the spirits of every silver paw who had ever lived, lending their strength to their last living heir. "Kill her," Cain's voice cracked like a whip. "Now, before she can complete whatever ritual." His words were cut off as the first wave of power rolled down the cliff face like liquid starlight. The wolves in the front rank screamed as silver fire washed over them, not burning their flesh, but burning through the lies they'd built their entire worldview upon. For one horrible, beautiful moment, they saw the truth, saw the real history their ancestors had tried so hard to bury, saw the Silver Empire as it had truly been, not a tyranny of monsters, but a golden age of balance and harmony between the wild and the civilized, the magical and the mundane. Saw what the world might have been if fear hadn't triumphed over wonder. Half of them fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of generational guilt. The other half raised their weapons and charged, choosing violence over revelation because violence was easier to understand. Maya raised her right hand, and the waterfall behind her exploded upward in a pillar of silver fire that could be seen for 100 miles. When she raised her left, the ancient stones throughout the valley began to sing, their voices joining the chorus that had started with her first scream of power 3 nights ago. "I am not your victim," she said, and her voice carried the authority of empresses and the fury of the dispossessed. "I am not your sacrifice. I am not your monster, created to justify your fears and validate your prejudices." She stepped off the cliff, and she didn't fall. Silver fire held her aloft, wings of pure energy that cast rainbow shadows across the valley floor. Around her, the very air shimmered with power that rewrote reality with every heartbeat. I am Maya Silverpaw, she declared, hovering above the assembled army like an avenging angel. I am the daughter of the line you thought you'd exterminated. I am the voice of every child murdered in their sleep, every healer burned for their gifts, every dreamer who dared imagine a world where magic and mundane could coexist in peace. The wolves below scattered like leaves before a hurricane, but there was nowhere to run. Silver fire erupted from the ground in perfect circles, not trapping them but illuminating them, forcing them to be seen, to be known, to be judged by the very standards they'd used to condemn generations of innocence. And I am here, Maya continued, her voice carrying across the valley like the voice of prophecy itself, to offer you the choice you never gave us. She gestured, and the silver fire around each wolf shifted, becoming something else entirely, not chains, but mirrors, reflecting not their physical forms, but their souls, showing them exactly what they'd become in their pursuit of a safety that could only be bought with the blood of the innocent. Some of them wept, others raged. A few, the ones whose hearts weren't completely dead to wonder, looked up at her with something that might have been hope. Submit, she said simply. Acknowledge the crimes your ancestors committed in your name. Swear to do better, to be better, to build a world where children aren't murdered for the gifts they're born with, and I will let you live to see that world. Never. Elder Cain's voice was hoarse with fury and terror. We will never submit to an abomination. We will never acknowledge the authority of the cursed bloodline. Maya's expression didn't change. Then you've made your choice. She closed her fist, and Elder Cain simply wasn't anymore. Not dead, nothing so merciful. Simply removed from existence, edited out of reality like a mistake being corrected by a cosmic editor. The remaining wolves stared at the empty space where their leader had been standing, and Maya saw the exact moment when they truly understood what they were facing. Not a girl with some minor magical talents, not even a powerful sorceress driven mad by grief and rage. They were facing a goddess, a force of nature given human form and human motivations, a power that could reshape reality itself with the casual ease of breathing. Anyone else want to test my resolve? Maya asked conversationally. 46 wolves fell to their knees in perfect unison. We submit, Alpha Greycliff whispered, his grizzled face streaked with tears. We submit to the authority of the Silver Throne. We beg forgiveness for the crimes of our ancestors. Maya studied them for a long moment, silver fire dancing around her like living jewelry. Then slowly she descended until her bare feet touched the ground again. Forgiveness, she said softly, is not mine to give. It belongs to the dead, to the children who never got to grow up, to the healers who were burned for their compassion, to the dreamers who were silenced before they could share their visions. She walked among them, and they remained kneeling, not daring to meet her eyes. But redemption, she continued, that you can earn one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage in the face of fear at a time. She stopped in front of Alpha Greycliff, studying his weathered face. You have children. Yes, my lady, 2 daughters. And if one of them started showing signs of the old gifts, what would you do? The Alpha's face crumpled. Before today, I would have followed council law. I would have reported them for evaluation and disposal. And now? Now I would give my life to protect them, he whispered. I would die before I let them suffer for the crime of being born different. Maya nodded slowly. Then perhaps there's hope for your bloodline yet. She turned away, walking back toward the cliff, where Kieran waited with expressions of awe and terror warring across his features. Go home, she called over her shoulder. Tell the council that the old ways are returning. Tell them that the age of hiding is over, and the age of reckoning has begun. Tell them that Maya Silverpaw sends her regards and her promise. What promise? Alpha Greycliff asked, his voice barely audible. Maya looked back at him, and for just a moment, her expression held all the terrible beauty of a star going supernova. that they can change willingly, or I can change them by force. But one way or another, this world will be different when I'm done with it. As the defeated army limped away into the forest, Maya finally allowed herself to sag against Kieran's supporting arms. The power was still there, would always be there now, but using it at that level had cost her. Was it everything you hoped it would be? He asked gently, stroking her hair as she trembled with exhaustion and reaction. No, Maya said quietly. It was exactly what it needed to be. Nothing more, nothing less. She looked up at the waterfall, where silver mist still danced in the morning light, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not peace. There would be no peace for a long time yet, but purpose, direction. The certainty that came from finally knowing exactly who she was meant to be. The real work starts now, she whispered. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, came the sound of howling, not in fear or rage, but in welcome. The old blood was rising, and the world would never be the same. Maya just became a goddess before your eyes, and you felt every second of that power surge. I can see thousands of you listening, getting chills, feeling alive, but only dozens will subscribe. If I can spend weeks crafting magic for you, you can spend 1 second supporting it. Hit subscribe, or admit this story didn't actually move you at all. Chapter 9. Well, what does it mean to be a goddess when you're still learning how to be human? Maya stood in the sacred grove 3 weeks after her transformation, watching the children play among the silver-touched trees. They laughed without fear now, these little ones who had spent their lives hiding gifts that should have been celebrated. A girl who could make flowers bloom with her touch. A boy whose dreams showed him glimpses of tomorrow. Twins who could speak to the ravens and convince them to carry messages across impossible distances. Beautiful, magical children who would have been executed as abominations under the old order. They called her the Silver Empress, now the Returned Queen, the Lady of the Whispering Falls, titles that felt heavy as iron chains around her neck, even as she wore them with the dignity her bloodline demanded. Could you carry such weight? Could you stand in the space between what was and what might be, knowing that every choice you make will ripple across generations? You're brooding again, Kieran observed, settling beside her on the moss-covered stone that had become her informal throne. Even now, 3 weeks into their new life, he still looked at her sometimes as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. As if the girl who had bled in the forest and the goddess who could remake reality were two different people wearing the same face. Maybe they were. Brooding suggests I'm dwelling on problems, Maya replied, watching as one of the twins coaxed a family of rabbits out of the underbrush with soft clicking sounds. I prefer to think of it as contemplating possibilities. What possibilities would you contemplate if you suddenly found yourself responsible for reshaping an entire world? The grove was filling up every day. Word had spread through the supernatural underground, whispered conversations in hidden places. Coded messages passed through networks that had survived centuries of persecution. The Silver Empress had returned. The old blood was rising. There was finally, after generations of hiding, a safe place for the gifted to exist without fear. They came in 2s and 3s at first. Families who had spent lifetimes moving from territory to territory, always one step ahead of discovery. Lone wolves whose powers had manifested too late or too obviously to hide. Ancient bloodlines that had dwindled to single individuals carrying the weight of entire magical legacies in their solitary hearts. Now the grove housed nearly 300 souls, and more arrived every day. 300 people looking to her for guidance, protection, hope, 300 lives hanging in the balance of every decision she made. Do you ever wonder, Maya said quietly, if we're doing the right thing, building this place, gathering these people, are we creating a sanctuary or just a very beautiful target? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of teenagers practice combat techniques under the tutelage of his few remaining packmates, the ones who had followed him into exile years ago and now served as the backbone of their growing settlement's defenses. These weren't just idle fears. The Council of Alphas hadn't simply surrendered after their defeat at Whispering Falls. They'd regrouped, reorganized, started reaching out to other supernatural communities, painting Maya's growing settlement as a threat to the natural order. I think he said finally that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing are mutually exclusive, and I think you stopped choosing safe the night you let your silver fire burn bright instead of hiding it in shadow. He was right, of course, but did that make her brave or just reckless with other people's lives? Maya stood, silver fire unconsciously spiraling around her fingers as it did whenever her emotions ran particularly deep. The children had grown accustomed to the display. To them, she was simply Maya, the lady who told stories and healed scraped knees and made the flowers in the garden grow tall and strong. They had no concept of the terrible power that could unmake reality with a thought. Sometimes she envied them that innocence. Power without innocence, love without naivety, the weight of divinity resting on shoulders that had only recently learned to carry their own burdens. The scouts brought more reports today, she said, not looking at Kieran. 3 settlements burned in the last week. Not by us, not by anyone connected to us, but the council is telling everyone that the Silver Empress's influence is spreading, corrupting previously peaceful communities. They're using our existence as justification for a new round of purges. People were dying because she existed, not because of anything she'd done, but because her very presence had shifted the balance of power in ways that made those in authority desperate to reassert control. Maya, children, Kieran, they're burning children and telling their parents it's necessary to prevent another Whispering Falls. Her voice cracked on the words, and several of the playing children looked over with concern. She forced a smile for their benefit, waving them back to their games. Could you smile reassuringly at children while your heart broke for other children dying in your name? What if they're right? She whispered, so quietly only Kieran could hear. What if I am a corrupting influence? What if my very existence makes the world more dangerous for the people I'm trying to protect? This was the question that haunted every hero's journey, the moment when the weight of unintended consequences threatened to crush the spirit of even the strongest soul. Kieran stood as well, moving to face her directly. Then what's your alternative? Disappear? Let them win? Let them continue murdering innocents while telling themselves it's for the greater good? I could end it, Maya said, the words falling from her lips like stones into still water. I have the power now. I could reach out across the world and simply stop them, all of them. Every wolf who has ever raised a hand against a child for the crime of being born different. The terrible temptation of absolute power, the ability to solve every problem with decisive action, to cut through complex moral questions with the sharp blade of divine authority. You could, Kieran agreed, carefully, but would that make you a savior or just a very efficient tyrant? Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. Does it matter if the end result is a world where magical children don't burn in their beds? Does it matter how we get there? Here was the heart of every moral dilemma, the question of whether good ends could justify terrible means, whether the road to paradise could be paved with the bones of the wicked. It matters to them, Kieran said, gesturing toward the playing children. It matters to every person who looks at you and sees hope instead of fear. It matters because the moment you become the kind of ruler who solves problems by eliminating everyone who disagrees with you, you stop being someone worth following. And there it was, the choice that defined every leader who had ever wielded power beyond the ordinary, to remain connected to humanity while exercising divine authority, to remember love while wielding the tools of war. Maya watched the children play, their laughter bright as silver bells in the afternoon air. Among them she spotted little Elena, barely 6 years old, whose touch could heal any wound, but who still cried when she scraped her knee. Thomas, 8, who could see through the eyes of any bird in the sky but was afraid of the dark. Maria and Marcus, the twins who spoke to ravens, who still held hands when thunder rolled across the sky. Children who trusted her absolutely, who had no concept that their protector might also be their greatest danger. Sometimes, Maya said quietly, I dream about her, the girl I was before Whispering Falls, before the prophecy and the power and the terrible responsibility. She was so simple, so human. She was also dying in a forest, hunted by the people she'd spent her life trying to please. Kieran pointed out gently, she was powerful and afraid and alone. Now you're powerful and determined and surrounded by people who love you for exactly what you are. Am I still human, though? The question that haunted her nights, when the silver fire danced behind her eyelids and she could feel the pulse of life in every living thing for miles around. When I can unmake someone from existence with a thought, when I can rewrite the laws of physics as easily as changing my clothes, what does that make me? The eternal question of those who transcend ordinary limitations. Where is the line between human and other, between protector and deity, between blessing and curse? You're still you, Kieran said simply. Still the girl who chose mercy over vengeance, who builds gardens instead of graveyards, who tells bedtime stories to frighten children and makes sure everyone has enough to eat. Power doesn't change who you are, Maya. It just amplifies it. But what if who you are isn't enough? What if love and mercy and the desire to do good aren't sufficient tools to build a better world? Maya was quiet for a long time, watching the sun begin to set behind the silver-touched trees. In the distance, she could hear the adults returning from their daily tasks, building new homes, expanding the gardens, training the older children in combat techniques and defensive magic. The sounds of a community building something permanent, something that might last beyond the next crisis. A community that existed because she had chosen to stop hiding, to stop apologizing for what she was, to stop making herself small to comfort those who would never be comfortable with her existence. Tell me something, she said, finally, turning to face Kieran fully. If you had to choose, if the cost of keeping this place safe, of protecting these people, was becoming something monstrous, would you pay it? The question that cut to the heart of every moral philosophy, whether love could justify any action, whether the protection of innocence could excuse the destruction of the guilty. Kieran's storm-gray eyes held hers steadily. Are you asking me what I would do or what I would want you to do? Both, neither. I don't know. Maya's laugh was shaky, uncertain. I need to know that someone understands what this feels like, to have all this power, all this responsibility, and still feel like I'm failing everyone who's counting on me. The loneliness of leadership, the weight of making decisions that would affect hundreds of lives, the burden of being looked to for answers when the questions themselves seemed impossible. You're not failing them, Kieran said softly, reaching out to touch her face with infinite gentleness. You're giving them something they've never had before, a chance to exist without fear. That's not failure. Little flame, that's revolution. Revolution. The word hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat, because revolutions, even necessary ones, always came with a price. Maya leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and letting herself be, for just a moment, the girl she had been instead of the goddess she had become. Sometimes I wonder if the old prophecies got it wrong. If the choice wasn't between healing and destruction, but between remaining human and becoming something else entirely. And which would you choose? If you had to save the world but lose yourself in the process, would the trade be worth it? Maybe, Kieran said quietly, the real choice is about finding a way to be both, to hold on to your humanity while wielding divine power, to remember love while exercising judgment, to stay connected to the girl who bled in the forest while embracing the goddess who can reshape reality. Was it possible? Could someone walk that narrow line between human and divine, between love and power, between salvation and damnation? Maya opened her eyes, looking out over the grove where nearly 300 souls had found safety under her protection. As she watched, more figures emerged from the forest, a new family seeking sanctuary, another group of refugees from the council's expanding purges. More lives depending on her, more people who would live or die based on the choices she made in the days and weeks to come. The council is massing armies, she said quietly. Not just wolves this time. They're reaching out to other supernatural communities, convincing them that I'm a threat to the natural order. Soon they'll come, and when they do, we'll face them together, Kieran said firmly. All of us. You're not carrying this burden alone anymore, Maya. But was that true? When the final moment came, when the choice had to be made between saving her people and maintaining her humanity, Would anyone else be able to make that decision? Would anyone else even understand the weight of it? Maya looked at the children playing in the silver-touched grass, at the adults building homes and lives, and hope from nothing but shared determination and magic. She thought of the families still in hiding, still afraid to reveal their gifts. She thought of the children who wouldn't live to see tomorrow if someone didn't stand against the forces that would destroy them. And she thought of the girl she had been, bleeding and alone and desperate, who had cried out into the darkness and been answered by love. "Tell me something," she said, her voice barely audible above the evening sounds of their growing community. "If I become the monster they say I am, if the power corrupts me, if I lose myself in the necessity of protecting everyone else, will you still love me?" The question that cut deeper than any blade, whether love could survive the transformation of the beloved into something unrecognizable. Kieran was quiet for a long time, and Maya held her breath, afraid of his answer.
"I will love who you choose to become," he said finally, "and I will trust that no matter how far the power takes you, some part of the girl who chose mercy at Whispering Falls will always remain. Trust, the foundation of all love, all hope, all possibility for redemption." As night fell over the grove, Maya stood among her people and felt the weight of the future settling around her like a cloak. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to either save the world or damn it. But tonight, surrounded by laughter and love and the simple magic of community, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps the prophecies were wrong after all. Perhaps there was a third option, a way to be both human and divine, both protector and individual, both silver flame and gentle heart. The question is, do you believe in that possibility? Do you believe someone can wield ultimate power without losing their essential humanity? Do you believe love is strong enough to anchor a soul against the currents of absolute authority? Because if this story has awakened something in you, if you felt the weight of Maya's choices, the pull of her power, the ache of her impossible situation, then you understand that these questions aren't just about fantasy characters in magical worlds. They're about all of us, about the choices we make when we have the power to change things, about the balance between doing what's right and doing what's easy, about the courage it takes to remain connected to our humanity when everything around us seems to be pulling us towards something harder, colder, more pragmatic. So here's my question for you. Would you have chosen her side? Would you have stood with the girl who refused to apologize for what she was, even knowing it might mean war? Would you have followed someone who promised revolution instead of comfortable lies? And perhaps more importantly, if you found yourself with the power to change the world, would you still choose to remain human? Because that choice, that beautiful, terrifying, impossible choice, is the one that defines every hero's journey. The choice to remain connected to love even when wielding the tools of gods. If Maya's story has touched something in your soul, if you've felt the fire of possibility burning in your chest as you've walked with her from broken girl to silver empress, then you need to subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell because this is just the beginning. The real war hasn't even started yet. Chapter 10. The message arrived with the dawn, carried by a raven whose eyes glowed with unnatural intelligence. Maya recognized the bird immediately, not one of the grove's ravens, not one of the messenger birds the twins had befriended. This creature's feathers held an oily sheen that spoke of dark magic, of power that came from places where the sun never shone. She took the scroll from its talons with careful fingers, noting how the parchment felt cold even in the morning warmth. The raven watched her with those burning eyes for a moment longer, then launched itself skyward with a cry that sounded almost like laughter. Almost like a warning. Maya unrolled the message, and the words burned themselves into her mind like brands. To the pretender who calls herself Empress, you have played at revolution long enough. You have gathered your outcasts and misfits, built your pretty sanctuary, convinced yourself that you can change the natural order through sentiment and misguided compassion. But every game must come to an end, and yours ends now. We are coming. Not the frightened council of alphas, not the scattered packs who lack the vision to see what must be done.
We are the true guardians of the ancient ways, the keepers of the balance you seek to destroy. We are older than your silver empire, stronger than your ancestral magic, more ruthless than your naive heart can possibly comprehend. You want war, little flame? You shall have it. But when your grove burns and your followers scatter like leaves before the storm, remember that you brought this upon yourself. Remember that every death, every scream, every child's tear shed in terror, they all belong to you. The Obsidian Council rises. We come with the new moon. And we do not offer mercy to pretenders. The scroll crumbled to ash in her hands, the dark magic consuming itself, now that its message had been delivered. Maya stood in her garden, surrounded by the silver-touched plants she'd nurtured with love and power, and felt something cold settle into her bones. The Obsidian Council. She'd heard whispers of them in the ancient texts, references scattered through the oldest prophecies like fragments of a nightmare half-remembered, not wolves. Something older, something that had existed in the spaces between worlds long before the first pack had howled at the moon. They were what the Council of Alphas feared to become. What happened when the desire for order became an obsession with control, when the need for safety transformed into a hunger for dominance so absolute it consumed everything in its path? Maya? She turned to find Kieran approaching through the morning mist, his face creased with concern. He'd sensed her distress through their bond. The silver thread that connected their souls across any distance had grown stronger since Whispering Falls, becoming something that defied all natural law. "What's wrong?" he asked. But even as the words left his lips, his nostrils flared. He could smell the residue of dark magic, the ozone scent of power that came from places where hope went to die. "We have visitors coming," Maya said quietly, watching as the ash that had once been a message scattered on the morning breeze, the kind who don't believe in negotiation. She told him about the message, watching as his expression grew darker with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes distant with thought and calculation. "The Obsidian Council," he repeated finally. "I've heard stories, legends, really. Most people think they're just myths." "Most people think the Silver Empire was just a myth, too," Maya pointed out, and look how that turned out. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the grove, waking up, children laughing as they played their morning games, adults beginning their daily tasks, the soft murmur of conversations around breakfast fires, 300 souls who had found safety under her protection, who trusted her to keep them from harm. 300 people who were about to become targets in a war they'd never asked to fight. "How long do we have?" Kieran asked. Maya looked up at the sky, where the moon was still visible despite the growing daylight, a pale crescent that would soon fade to nothing. 3 days until the new moon, maybe 4 if we're lucky. "And how many are we expecting?" That was the question that made her stomach clench with dread. "I don't know. The legends are vague about numbers, but they speak of the Obsidian Council as if it were a force of nature rather than an army. Something that doesn't so much attack as consume." Kieran was quiet, and Maya could almost hear the wheels turning in his head as he calculated their chances. 300 refugees, most of them untrained in combat, many of them children, against an enemy that had existed for millennia and commanded powers that made even the ancient bloodlines seem pale by comparison. The mathematics of survival were not encouraging. "We could run," he said finally, though they both knew it was a futile suggestion. "Scatter into the wilderness, split up into smaller groups that would be harder to track, and abandon everyone who can't keep up?" Maya shook her head. "The children, the elderly, the ones whose gifts make them visible no matter where they hide. What happens to them when we disappear into the forest?" They both knew the answer. The Obsidian Council didn't discriminate between combatants and civilians, between the guilty and the innocent. They saw only contamination that needed to be cleansed, anomalies that needed to be corrected. They would slaughter every living thing in the grove and call it restoration of the natural order. "Then we fight," Kieran said simply. "We make our stand here, in the place you've made sacred, and we show them that some things are worth dying for." Maya looked out over the grove, where her people, when had she started thinking of them that way, were beginning their day without any knowledge of the doom approaching with the dark of the moon. Children who had never known safety before finding this place. Adults who had spent lifetimes hiding their gifts, now able to practice their magic openly under the silver-touched trees. A community built on love instead of fear, a family forged from outcasts and misfits and dreamers who dared to believe the world could be different. Some things are worth dying for, she agreed quietly, but more importantly, some things are worth killing for. The words fell from her lips like stones into still water, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Not the warm, healing power she'd grown accustomed to, but something colder, sharper, more focused. The Silver Empress had been born from love and mercy and the desire to protect the innocent, but what emerged now was something else entirely, something forged in the crucible of imminent loss, tempered by the understanding that sometimes preservation required destruction. Sometimes a goddess had to become a weapon. Maya, Kieran said carefully, sensing the change in her like a shift in atmospheric pressure. Whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking, she said, silver fire beginning to dance around her fingertips, that the Obsidian Council isn't the only force of nature in this forest. She turned toward the grove, where the sounds of daily life continued unaware of the approaching storm. In 3 days, maybe 4, this peaceful scene would become a battlefield. Children would scream, blood would soak into the silver-touched earth. People who had finally found a place to call home would die defending it. Unless she made sure the battle was over before it truly began.
Gather the council, she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. Tell them to prepare for war. And tell them, she paused, feeling the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a cloak made of starlight and shadow. Tell them the Silver Empress is done playing by anyone else's rules. As she walked toward the grove center, where the great silver tree grew with roots that reached down to the very heart of the earth, Maya felt the last fragments of her human doubts fall away like shed skin. The girl who had bled in the forest was gone. The young woman who had struggled with the weight of power and responsibility had been refined away by necessity. What remained was something purer, more focused, infinitely more dangerous. What remained was a force of nature that would do whatever it took to protect what she loved. Behind her, Kieran followed in silence, and she could feel his mixture of awe and terror through their bond. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, what she was becoming, what she had to become. The real war was coming, and Maya's silver paw intended to win it. But in the shadows at the edge of the grove, where the morning mist clung to the ancient trees like grasping fingers, something stirred, something that had been watching, waiting, planning. The raven with the burning eyes perched on a branch just beyond the reach of the silver light, its head tilted as it observed the goddess preparing for battle. When it was satisfied with what it had seen, it launched itself skyward once more, carrying word back to masters who dwelt in places where hope was just another word for weakness. The pretender thinks she knows what war means. It would report, she thinks her love and her silver fire and her pretty sanctuary make her strong enough to stand against the endless dark. Soon she will learn otherwise. Soon she will understand that some battles cannot be won through power alone. Soon she will discover that the Obsidian Council has weapons she has never dreamed of, allies she could never imagine, purposes that stretch back to the first moments when order separated itself from chaos and declared itself eternal. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, not natural weather, but something far more ominous, the kind of storm that came when the fundamental forces of the universe began to shift, when powers older than memory stirred from their ancient slumber. The new moon was coming, and with it, the end of everything Maya Silverpaw had built, or the beginning of something far more magnificent and terrible than the world had ever seen. The choice, as always, would be hers. But this time, the consequences of that choice would echo through eternity itself.
As the silver mist swirled around the grove like a protective embrace, and the children played their innocent games beneath trees that hummed with ancient power, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the magical outcasts who had found sanctuary here, but the very nature of power itself. Love against order, hope against certainty, the dream of what could be against the weight of what had always been. And in the center of it all, a young woman who had learned to be a goddess without forgetting how to be human. The real war was coming, and nothing would ever be the same.